If everybody could find their seats, we're going to get started again. If everyone can just find their seats, please. We have two more fireside chats and a couple presentations in the next session, and we're going to get started. So our next fireside chat is between myself and Debbie Jessup. So Debbie is the president and founder of Sage Fem Strategy, so I'll let Debbie do a quick introduction of herself, and then we'll jump in.
Hi, so I'm Debbie Jessup, and Sage Fem Strategies doesn't really tell you much about me, but it was my great privilege to have spent almost 2 decades working for the member of Congress who was the original author for the Newborn Screening Saves Lives Act. So for my tenure on the Hill, newborn screening was her #1 issue. It became my #1 issue, and it was such an honor to be able to help pass that bill for the first time, to make sure that it was funded adequately and that it was funded at higher levels each Congress, and to have been able to reauthorize it. It was one of my greatest disappointments when she retired almost 2 years ago that we left a bill unpassed that needed to be reauthorized. So it's a privilege to be with you here today to talk about how to advocate and what you might see and learn and how you could work best with Congress.
Perfect. And yes, Debbie is a fantastic partner. We're really thankful to have her here today. And just a little background on myself. I know many of you know me in the newborn screening space, but other half of my job is I do a lot of EveryLife Foundation's congressional outreach, and so I do a lot of work with policymakers on the Hill and building relationships, and so that's what we're here to talk today about. I would like to flag at the start, this is more of a broader conversation. We'll have some time for Q&A hopefully at the end to address potentially some questions specific about the Newborn Screening Reauthorization Act, but we will not be addressing it in our conversation today, because today is more about how do you develop this relationship with Congress? How do you build relationship with policymakers? And we're going to talk about it in the federal aspect, because that is definitely Debbie's background and a little more of my background. But what we're talking about today can also be, the key themes that we're going to talk today about can also be used when working with state policymakers, and that's a key part of newborn screening. But with that, we're going to start right at the beginning in terms of like how you build that initial relationship with those offices. And so I'll start a little bit talking about kind of the perspective of the patient advocacy organization, where you want to do that initial research. You don't just want to kind of pick a committee, throw a dart at the board and say, that looks like a good office, or focus solely on your representative. That might be a great place to start, your local representative, your state senator. But doing some research can really highlight, okay, this person may or may not be interested. Having understanding of why they came to Congress, having understanding of the issues that are important to them. If they've been in Congress for a few years, you can find the bills that they've sponsored. That's always a great place to go look in terms of, that is a very flashing light, big flashing light in terms of what are their priorities. And what is their previous work? How can you make connections with them? And so from the patient advocacy organization, just identifying which offices to work with is a really key part. And once you're there, recognizing that these offices are busy. On the House side alone, a congressional staffer who is handling the healthcare portfolio, they're handling all of healthcare, the entire system, and also probably 3 or 4 other things: energy, tax, post offices. They're handling a lot of issues. And so recognizing that them caring about an issue they can care about an issue and also not necessarily have as much time as you would like for them to have on the issue, on that issue. And it's doesn't reflect how much they care about it. It's just a reflection of, these are very busy people. And so I want to pass to Debbie in terms of when the patient advocacy organization is first reaching out to you when you're on the Hill, what were some of those interactions like, and what were you looking for, and what was really helpful to you?
Okay, well, I'm going to start, before I answer that question, by saying I went to the Hill 20 years ago now, as was a nurse midwife in a PhD program, and I went to do an 8-month fellowship, and I ended up staying 18 years because I fell in love with policy. And when I went, I was in a PhD program. I was at the top of my career, and I felt pretty bright and pretty capable, and I was immediately humbled by, number one, the brilliance of the people I worked with, the young people who had come to work on the Hill on both sides of the aisle, whose passion was unbelievable for being a public servant and for the issues that their boss championed. And like Dylan said, these are really, really busy people, and they come from a wide range of backgrounds. And so some of them know a lot about health, and some of them handling health know nothing about health. So I know that there are, a lot of organizations that just come to the Hill and they just do visits, and they're not very prepared, and there are others that are excruciatingly prepared. I think there's a few things that you need to know when you go in an office. You need to make sure you know what that member of Congress has sponsored, and what their passions are, maybe what committees they sit on and what caucuses they've chaired. Because I can't tell you the number of times people came to me from a disease organization to talk about newborn screening, not knowing that my boss was the author of the bill that was trying to improve that. And certainly none of them knew I was a nurse and that I had been a genetics counselor at one point in my career. Nobody knew any of those things. And that's fine, because you don't have to know that. But you should walk into an office, and the first question you should ask is not, do you know anything about newborn screening? Because every staffer worth their darn is going to say, oh, yes, I know about newborn screening. They don't want to look like they don't. The question would be, do you have a personal experience or relationship with newborn screening or with any of the rare diseases that it tests for? Because that's where you're going to get the information from that staffer about what they know or maybe what their boss knows. And I also think that for many years when you come to the Hill, there are cycles. There are very busy cycles, and there are not so busy cycles. The Rare Disease Week falls at the very beginning of the busiest cycle on the Hill, and that's during March Madness appropriations time. And you need to understand that when you visit people during these very, very crazy busy times, it's not that they might not be passionately interested in what you're talking about. It's just that they have 10 other visits that day to handle, and they also have to write a speech for their boss and do a committee prep for a hearing that's coming up. So they may seem very short and very curt with you, and that isn't necessarily how they feel. So you want to present your stories as best you can and get to your ask. Very often, people come up and they're so passionate about what they want to talk about that a group of people from possibly one rare disease group will come up and each present their story, and now we're at the end of that time and I still don't know what you wanted us to do. And so maybe now I seem a little bit irritated because I wanted to help you, but I haven't even had a chance to hear what you wanted. So it's a balance of telling your story and getting someone engaged, but also engaging them and getting a feel for what they know, and from the very beginning, letting them know what you're asking of them.
And I think that leads nicely into the next aspect, is how to maintain the relationship. Debbie made a point in terms of people come up to the Hill for their Hill Day, and then that's it. Maybe they come back next year, maybe they come back later in the year, and that's all an office hears from them. Going back to what we've talked a lot about, staffers are taking a lot of these meetings. And so maintaining that relationship is there's a lot of patience required in that process from the patient advocacy side, because again, you're going to feel like you're not making progress. You're going to feel like maybe they're not responding to your emails in a fashion that you would prefer. Or maybe they haven't joined as a co-sponsor to that bill. You can come in with the ask, Doesn't necessarily mean that the member is going to agree to that ask. That is a very key difference. But it still doesn't mean that they don't care about the issue, and it also doesn't mean that you're not making progress. And so it's this idea of maintaining that relationship. A big part of that is still reaching out to that office and finding that balance of being in their face, but not being obnoxious. I will say it is a fine line. There are times, I do this every day, and there are times where I go over that line, there's times where I don't reach that line. It's how do you find that balance of maintaining that relationship? Because, again, these are quite busy people. When I originally had interned in the Senate, I had my boss at the time made a comment, and he was like, I want to respond to all the emails that come in. He was like, but what might happen is I see an email, somebody walks into my office to have a conversation. I have that 5-minute conversation. By the time I get back to my inbox, I no longer see that email, and I forgot about it just because I had another conversation, and because I don't see it, that will now not happen. He was like, I didn't want to do that. He's like, I feel bad about it. He's like, but that's the fact. And so recognizing that following up is okay. Reaching out to them a few times is okay. Now again, sending 3-4 emails in a day, 3-4 emails in a week, that might be a little over the line. But it's recognizing that keeping that relationship, and every time you go back to them, you're coming back with, to Debbie's point, for a reason, to provide an update on a story, to provide an update on the bill. Let's say one of the ask is to co-sponsor a bill. If you go back to them after a month or 2 months and say, thanks so much for taking the time to meet with us today, meet with us a few months ago. We just want to provide an update that these additional members have joined as a co-sponsor to the bill. Because that's helpful information, especially if it's joining in a bipartisan fashion. That can be really impactful. There's also an impact in terms of maintaining that relationship, and which I'll pass over to Debbie, is the importance of being that expert advisor. It is such a key role for the patient advocacy groups for offices, and I'll pass over to Debbie for that.
So people on the Hill, staffers meet a lot. I mean, I cannot even begin to tell you the number of groups that they will interact with in a given week versus a given year. And there are quickly groups and individuals that rise to the top of your list because of how helpful they are. And like Dylan said, being the expert advisor is one thing, to tell someone that you are, but to follow through. The follow through is so critical. And when you're on the Hill, your turnaround time for something that your boss wants is about 30 minutes. It's certainly not much more than a day. And so when I would reach out to someone, when there were people who always got back to me and always gave me absolutely correct information that I did not have to double-check facts for, those people became invaluable in my life, and I used them for years and years and years. I do want to talk a little bit about the importance of an individual, because I think when you're in organizations, you tend to think that only large organizations can be impactful. And so I want to just tell you about someone you probably have heard of that I met very early on in my first or second year on the Hill, and that was the Jeffrey Modell family, who came in to. That was at the beginning of their advocacy to get SCID on the panels of every state. And, you know, one family who met with every single appropriator, and they were also meeting with all 50 states and trying to get them on the state panels. But at the federal level, they recognized that having money specifically set aside to get this one rare disease on every state panel was very important. To this day, it's the only one disease that has had money put towards it to get it on the state panels for newborn screening. And it was because of those two people who came 2 or 3 times a year and always made sure they stopped back to see me, would send me emails, would give me information. After they'd met with me the first or second time, didn't take very much of my time up. They would just stop in and say, you know, we're here, we're on the Hill, we're making visits. Who would you recommend we meet with? And I just want to see if there's anything you need. So I do think that individual relationship is incredibly important. The thing you have to keep in mind is that I was a rarity on the Hill to have stayed 18 years in one office. Most offices, you make that relationship in February when you come for Rare Disease Week, and when you come back next year, it's a different staffer, and you have to start over again. So once a year, never enough. You need to follow up throughout the year. Now that I do this from the other side, and I'm advocating for some organizations' issues, I've recognized how hard it is to do this, how hard it is to find that fine line between being overly annoying versus just making sure that that staffer gets the appropriate information. And I worked with a staffer now in the Senate who I've known for 15 years, and we work on an issue that she and I both love. But I have to walk a fine line because I need something back from her, but she doesn't always get back to me. So, I give her a week or two, and then I shoot another email. I'm so sorry to bother you, but I just wanted to make sure this didn't get lost in your inbox. Sometimes by my third email, she'll then email me back and say, I'm so sorry, it's been really busy. I know it's not because she doesn't want to work on this issue, because I know how passionate she is about it, but I also recognize how busy she is. So you do need to just be patient. I do think emailing somebody every day, that's way overkill. Waiting 2 or 3 months to email them again, not enough. So, and I think it's also important to check with people when you first meet them. How would you like me to follow up with you? Would you rather I call the office? Would you rather an email? Is there some way I can better communicate with you? And they'll tell you. Occasionally, not that often, I actually gave my phone number to people who came in because I knew I wanted to follow up with them, and I would say, text me. If I don't get back to you, text me, because I really do want to follow up on this. You won't get that very often, but occasionally you will. And the other thing I'll tell you is that the personal touch goes a really long way, because staffers are very, very underappreciated by their bosses, by the chiefs of staff in their office, and often by the people coming in. And so there is one group that I worked with all the time. They're the nurse anesthetists, and we were carrying a bill for all the advanced practice nurses, and so they came in to talk to me. And from the very beginning, this group understood the importance of forming a relationship. And there was one person in one of their state offices who identified that not only was I an advanced practice nurse, but that I was still active in my professional organization, and so started Googling me when he went home and realized that I was talking at a different conference. And he sent me an email that year saying, oh, I see you're speaking at your national organization's conference. I hope it goes well. Let me know how it went. That moved me so greatly that from that point on, I took that guy's calls. If anytime he called, I took his calls. So little touches like that with staff are really important, because they're people too, and you want to be their friend. So.
One thing I want to touch on real quick that Debbie talked about before, in terms of that expert advisor, and also understanding you don't have to be an expert in the broad issue. You have to be an expert in what you are aware of. I think in terms of Debbie's point, that she could email certain organizations or certain individuals that she had a relationship with, and she trusted that when she got it back, that was correct. You want to be that person for your story. That if you get too broad and you try to say, well, I'm an expert in all of access for newborn screening, there are very few people who are truly experts in all of access to newborn screening. Being narrow is okay. Being an expert in your story is okay. Being an expert in your life and how a certain bill impacts you is okay. But being that expert is what's important. And also, to touch on Debbie's also point in terms of the staffer, it's always great to get a member meeting. They're really fun. I will say, from a personal level, again, I do this for my day. I do it for my day job. I still love having member meetings.
You get a great picture.
You get a great picture. There's a great rush. There's something fun about when you get to be in that room with them and talk to them and hear them react to your story, hear them react to what you're telling them, and especially when you get great feedback. don't underestimate the staffer. These are people who are doing a job they love, at earning less than they could if they did it somewhere else, and they're doing it because they want to be there. They're doing it because they want to make a difference. And so, to Debbie's point, they are underappreciated both at times by outside organizations as well as their bosses. If they're in a good office, maybe less so from their boss. But they are very important. And you might see the fact that they are ever changing as a negative. That is just a little more about the nature of Congress as an entity. And so it's okay that if you're seeing a lot of movement, that is just kind of the nature of the beast with Congress. And so it's okay to maintain a relationship with the officers overall. It's also okay to maintain a relationship with that individual. If you had been meeting with somebody for a couple of years and had maintained a really good relationship, and all of a sudden you show up one day and they're not there, don't be afraid to go after. Still take your meeting. Now you have to restart that relationship a little bit. Hopefully not from the start, because they have the relationship you had before was passed down. But it's okay to then go home and go on LinkedIn, start Googling, find out where that staffer went, and reach out to them and say, congratulations on the new job. Really loved working with you in Representative's X office. Would love to meet with you to see how our work previously translates to your new job. And that's a great way to go. And yep.
I just want to mention a little bit about district offices, because everybody thinks you come to DC and that's where you form the relationship. In the district offices, especially the House offices, people stay much longer. The staff there are frequently there for 5, 10 years, or as long as the member's on the Hill. And while the true subject matter expert is the staffer who handles health in DC, in the district offices, staffers have both geographic and issue areas that they handle. So the health staffer in a district office probably has more time to meet with you. And when they meet with you, not as many people are coming to them, and so they're going to get more interested and involved in your issue. And guess what? They're going to be on the phone with their counterpart in the DC office, and they're going to be telling them, you need to meet with this person, you need to follow up on this issue. So sometimes it's easier at the local level to form the relationship there and then build up to the DC office from that.
So next on our list, I'm actually going to identify and move past just because time constraint. I want to make sure I get to the last point, which is one Debbie and I are excited to talk about. So the third point, which we had hoped to have time for, is the importance of identifying a champion. And if you find Debbie or I throughout the day, we're happy to talk a little bit more about that. There is a difference between a good relationship and somebody who you can count on to go to the mat for you, and how to identify that champion, how to maintain that relationship. Is just a building on what we just talked about, but there are a few things. But I do want to make sure we talk about the importance of how to utilize information, and the importance of taking information that's out in the world and bringing it to staffers. And for this conversation, we're going to utilize the example of the forthcoming National Academy study around newborn screening modernization. And so there have been a lot of great work done in terms of advocacy between outside organizations and Debbie and Congresswoman Laura Ballard's office, and to get this National Academy study into report language. When it comes out, though, it being released, that's just a start. If the proper support isn't there, if it's not being utilized, it's just going to fall flat. National Academy studies, GAO studies, Reagan-Udall, a whole bunch of other options. These studies come out, and they're great, and they've never put one out that isn't trying to say something important. However, they do put out quite a few. They can get lost in the shuffle. And so it's a great example of take that information, find how it connects to your story, find how it connects to what you are the expert in, and utilize that information to bring it back to that relationship, to those offices, to those staffers, and say, not sure if you saw this, but I did want to flag National Academy, just put out their modernization study. It's 30, 50-page document. But here are the highlights, and also specifically I want to call out this recommendation that they make, because this really reflects what we've been talking about and how it could really impact our lives. And so utilizing information that comes off the Hill, on the Hill, because sometimes staffers see it and they keep planning to get to it, and then 3 weeks have gone by and they haven't gotten to it. And sometimes they just miss it. There are things, they cannot see everything. We do not see everything. Just think about just the general news of the world. We all know that we miss aspects of that. And it is the same rule on the Hill. There are things that they just miss, not through wanting to miss it, just because there's a lot out there. And so I just want to pass to Debbie in terms of like how to use the information. And I know you're also really excited about the National Academy study. So just kind of giving you a runway to talk about that a little bit.
So one of the reasons that the NAS study took place was that it was one of the provisions in the reauthorization for the Newborn Screening Saves Lives Act. And after 2 Congresses of being able to pass that bill in the House but not in the Senate, it was sort of like, what can we do? What can we do when we leave to make sure that this issue still has a platform? And so I want to talk a little bit about windows of opportunity, because newborn screening is an ongoing issue and it's important to every one of you, but it's not important to everybody on the Hill every day of every Congress. And people on the Hill are, if nothing, the most reactive people. They are not proactive. So they react to things that happen. So that's why everybody wanted to figure out during COVID how to make COVID tell a story about their issue, because everybody cared about COVID. So when there are reports that come out, I think that's a window of opportunity. And they can be missed very easily if people don't pick them up and take them. So I think having some sort of a handout when you visit people that summarizes in one page, one front of a page, what this study does, and then you being able to tie that to your particular part of the newborn screening story is very, very important. And then just gauge whether or not the person you're talking to seems the slightest bit interested, and even maybe with a follow-up email, are they interested in this, and might this be something that their boss would want to work on? I do think, just briefly, that it's important to, when you're looking for champions, for multiple people not to be asking multiple offices to be the champion without there being some coordination. That can cause a little bit of angst when 2 or 3 members think that they have been asked to be a champion for an issue, and they all want it, and nobody has figured out which is the one we're really asking. So I think the importance of coalition, of working with all of the organizations that care about newborn screening, is critical. So, shut up.
That's a great point. I want to flag one thing about that, because the theme that I think is really important. We talked in the beginning about the importance of research when you're identifying the office and starting to build that relationship. Never stop doing your research. Never stop talking to each other. That is the important part, because if information you give an office turns out to be bad information, you're not going back to square one, but that will impact your relationship, because there are a lot of people trying to maintain that relationship. And if they can't trust you, or how much they can trust you as takes a ding, that's going to impact the relationship. And so it's making sure you're always doing that research. But we do have time for, I think, for potentially a couple questions. If anybody hasn't, we got one. We got 2 in the back.
Good morning. I was really blessed to be able to participate in Rare Cross America, and so my question is related to local offices. In relation to what you guys were saying, I have the experience where I was able to meet one-on-one with the Director of Constituent Services at my rep's office, and she was exactly like you described, like the unicorn, right? Like, I love that you came in. I'm so, moved by your story. I'm going to get this over to my staffer today. She texted me a picture of us with her personal, like all of these things, right? But I was kind of caught of, oh my gosh, I just don't even know how to navigate, how to coordinate with this woman. And like you said, there's a fine balance between enough and too much, like being a pest. So my question is that in these instances where they've given you their personal number, They seem to be, very open to communicating with you. Is it, where's the line between like how you should communicate with them? Like, for example, would it be better to text her to her personal number, or would it be better to funnel emails to her official, email address there, right? And like, how do you walk the line of building a relationship without coming off as like too friendly or,
I think
weirding them out?
I think definitely using her official email. You only go to the personal one if they gave it to you and if they're not coming back to you from their professional one. Nobody really wants to be harassed at home on their personal text or on their personal email. But when we give them out, it's because we do want to have a relationship with somebody. So I'm sure that they would get back to you. But again, one, and then a couple of weeks later, a second follow-up. And if they're offering to help you form a relationship with the DC office, then you should ask them to make that introduction or maybe do a joint Zoom meeting with you.
I do want to flag one thing just in terms of frequency of reaching out. It also depends on what is happening. So Debbie referenced like the windows of opportunity. When we were working on the reauthorization, there are times where months would go by where Debbie and I would not be emailing. But towards the end, when we're trying to make sure that it was in the report language, that frequency picked up. And recognizing that sometimes it is important to pick up that frequency, recognizing what is happening, and take the lead from the staffer on that. You'll know based on what they're saying, like, oh, we're working really hard to get this done the next couple of weeks. Great, there's your signal that the next couple of weeks, you can be a little more like, on a couple day basis, be like, hey, how can I help? What's going on? And so that frequency will change. But I saw another hand also bopped up, but I also know we're close on time. So is there still another question, or are we good to move?
Going to a different office outside your district on a bill is sometimes a challenge, especially if you can't talk to them when they're in their office. And I've been to DC, and we didn't have anyone from the specific office, so they weren't able to set up a meeting. But I have been able to talk to him when he's at home. And I'm just talking specifically about Earl Blumenauer, is for a bill that he's on one of the committees for the Medical Nutrition Equity Act, and which has been reintroduced into the House, but not into the Senate yet, because we're still looking for a Senate Republican. And so, how would you go about doing that?
I think it's okay on the House side to visit people from your state when there's no one from your district to go. I think I would never have turned down somebody who was coming from California who wanted to talk about an issue. I might have turned down a visit from somebody from Wisconsin, to be honest, because that just wasn't, they were going to have a different perspective than my boss's constituents would have, and there's a time crunch. But I do think, especially looking for those windows of time where staffers are less busy to talk about an issue. So the August recess and the October recess, staff have lots of time to take meetings with people who are not their constituents, but not during February, March, and April. So.
I just want to take a moment to thank for great questions and to thank Debbie for joining us today. I know we briefly skimmed by the idea of identifying a champion. Debbie has been a long champion for newborn screening, and just wanted to thank you for coming and for joining us today. And with that, I invite Jamie Sullivan and Dr. Glenn Knuckles to join us to come up stage for their fireside chat.
You all hear me? Okay.
How's this?
Waking
Yeah,
you all
okay.
up. We've got 2 more sessions before lunch, and really excited to be joined by Dr. Glenn Knuckles from the NIH. We yesterday spent a ton of time with CDC. Those who are, have been doing a lot of newborn screening work have gotten familiar with the work HRSA does. But we're here to talk a little bit about building partnerships with NIH. Every federal agency, of course, operates a little bit differently in terms of building partnerships and what they do, what their mandate is. But of course, NIH is still very critical to this community. You have an audience here of people that are sort of all in different stages of their newborn screening engagement, but it's pretty safe to say everyone here has some invested interest in the work that NIH does. So we're going to talk a little bit about what some of that work is and how you as a community can partner with the NIH, can build relationships, and why it may be the NIH does a little bit more that is related to newborn screening than you might think, but also just does more than maybe what people have in the traditional view. NIH is more than just funding lab science or bench work. It is truly integral to all stages of research and translating that into the community. So I'm really excited to have a conversation here today. The title of the session was NIH and the MD CARE Act, or we left off the act, but it's MD CARE Act. But we're going to talk a little bit broader because not every community has the benefit of an MD CARE Act. But I'd like to start there. Can you talk a little bit about what the MD CARE Act is and how it has enabled the NIH to build community partnerships around muscular dystrophy?
Sure, be happy to. Maybe we start with a little bit of background more on NIH. So we call it the National Institutes of Health. It's actually 27 different institutes and centers that each kind of has its own focus. There's a director for each one. So overall, it's about $48 billion of funding per year. We have a 300-acre campus in Bethesda, Maryland, where what we call the intramural program, the labs that are doing research there, but that's only about 20% of our overall budget, and about 80% of our budget goes to support competitive grants at universities, at private research institutions, some small businesses across the country and in some foreign countries. So I'm a program director in the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke, and I've been there about 10 years. And before that, I was a program director at the National Institute for Arthritis and Musculoskeletal and Skin Diseases. And those are 2 of the main institutes that fund muscular dystrophy research. So, as Jamie mentioned, there's legislation called the Muscular Dystrophy Community Assistance Research and Education Act, MD CARE Act. It was first passed in 2001, has been renewed twice since then. And it was the effort of really, I think, patient advocacy groups like the Muscular Dystrophy Association, Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy, the Facioscapulohumeral Muscular Dystrophy Society, communicating with Congress, finding, supporters, champions, including Senator Paul Wellstone, the late Senator Paul Wellstone of Minnesota, and so the legislation had guidance to NIH and some other federal agencies. So the guidance to us was really to expand and intensify research in the muscular dystrophies, to create a coordinating organization called the Muscular Dystrophy Coordinating Committee that's across multiple federal agencies. And it also established what we call a Centers of Excellence program in muscular dystrophy research. And then some of the other language went to, for example, the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention to have a surveillance and epidemiologic based study for the muscular dystrophies. So that so I've been involved in, helping design and implement that Centers of Excellence program. We have 6 centers across the United States that focus on key themes in a variety of muscular dystrophies. And most of those centers have very direct interaction and sometimes co-funding from patient advocacy groups. It's a requirement that they have an administrative core that engages the people with lived experience, and I think they do that very effectively. We want to have kind of a closed loop of input from affected individuals into the research, and then the researchers, keeping them updated about what's going on and how the progress is going. So, and then I'm the designated federal official, really executive secretary for the Interagency Muscular Dystrophy Coordinating Committee, and that committee has representatives from several different NIH institutes, from CDC, FDA, and then in addition to kind of research topics, within our mission for the Muscular Dystrophy Coordinating Committee is also things like access to care and services. And so we have representatives from Social Security Administration, Agency for Community Living, Department of Education, and then we have patient advocacy group representatives on the committee. And the federal legislation, encouraged or kind of mandated the creation of this committee. It was managed for a number of years before I became involved in it. They missed a couple of years in meetings, and so the legislation was revised that said, you will have meetings twice a year. And so there's a federal legislation that I have to make sure we have meetings twice a year. And our meetings are open to the public, and they're webcast live on NIH Videocast. And what we try to do is pick topics where, we realize that MDCC is a venue for educating federal agencies about what's going on in the muscular dystrophies. It's also a good place for the different patient advocacy groups to kind of share information and best practices. And so we pick a variety of topics for meetings, and we did one on newborn screening a couple of years ago. And so we had an opportunity for Melissa Parisi from NICHD, she and Molly Minier, who are, clear NIH champions for newborn screening. They kind of organized the session. They helped educate the other federal agency representatives about the process for newborn screening approval and so forth. And then we had Kathy Swoboda, who's an investigator in the SMA, spinal muscular atrophy community, give kind of their experience in implementing newborn screening for SMA. And then we had a researcher from Harvard talking about, the future of newborn screening and genome sequencing. So we try to pick topics like that. We do a variety of different topics. One of the other things through the Muscular Dystrophy Coordinating Committee is a strategic planning effort, a document that we call the Action Plan for the Muscular Dystrophies. And it was first developed in 2005, and it was last renewed in 2015. And it's intended to be a page that gets the whole community, all the stakeholders on the same page in terms of what are expert opinions for what research needs to be done, what obstacles there are in access to care and services, and how can we overcome those obstacles. So we're going through a process right now to renew the action plan again for release in 2025, and newborn screening has come up in the discussions there, and if you like I can.
Yeah, I'm curious because we have so many groups in the audience that don't have the benefit of having an MD Care Act, which took a heroic effort from the muscular dystrophy community, and it's something that I'd be curious to hear from Debbie's perspective on this. But it's that style of large authorizing legislation that creates some of this infrastructure. is not as frequent now as it has been in the past, and it's even harder to get across the finish line. We saw one example of that recently with Parkinson's, which took a member of Congress, having been affected by the issue very visibly to really kind of push over the finish line. What are some of the other ways, in the absence of having the legislation that requires all of this work? We know those champions still exist in the agency. We know there's desire and leadership, within the institutes to address rare diseases and do work that will help advance newborn screening as well as, therapy development. So what are some of the ways people in the audience what are the entry points? Where do they go from here?
So, I mentioned there's 27 different institutes and centers. Each one of those institutes and centers has a communication office, and I think they would be a good kind of front door for interaction. It can be a little bit challenging in some cases to figure out, well, which institute should I be contacting? So, if it's cardiovascular related, it would be National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. But in other cases, not at all clear. So we try to make what we do at NIH fairly transparent. There is a website called Report, NIH Report, and there's a lot of kind of numerical information on there. And there's also something on there called Matchmaker. And it's really a tool that's designed to help researchers figure out where their grant application is going to go. But I think for other people, it would work just as well. You can, plug in a keyword, a disease or something, and it'll tell you, what institute funds most of the research in that area. It'll also tell you what program director, although we're probably not the first point of contact for advocacy group interactions. It'll also give you a listing of the grants that are currently funded in that area. So that may be a good way. And we have interactions with representatives from patient advocacy groups as well as, people with lived experience on kind of all different levels. So, each of those institutes and centers has a formal advisory committee that advises the director, and all of them have people with lived experience or patient advocates on those committees. We're oftentimes putting together organizing, meetings, advisory, or just to share information with researchers and so forth. And we like to have, the perspective of patient advocates or people with lived experience. So NINDS organizes every year an event called the Nonprofit Forum, and it was held in, I think, late July of this year. The next one has not been scheduled, but you can Google search NINDS Nonprofit Forum and see what happens previously. That's an opportunity for patient advocacy groups to start a dialogue with NIH. You can come to our site and meet with our program staff or do it remotely. And I think it's also kind of a good place for sharing of best practices among patient advocacy groups that fit kind of within our area. And most other institutes have similar events that they invite people to.
Yeah, and one thing that people may not realize and may not be universal across every institute, but oftentimes there's a sort of partnership or alliance formed of organizations, patient organizations, professional organizations, researchers, and it could be a friends of, for NCATS, which is really the home for rare disease translational research. It's the NCATS Alliance. In the past, we did, in my former role, a lot of work with NHLBI. It was called the NHLBI Constituency Group. These are alliances of nonprofits and professional associations, and in one case we had a meeting every year with the leadership of the Institute where they gave us updates on their priorities, and we were able to ask questions and bring up topics across the different research areas. So if you aren't involved in The institute that you would reside in, love the matchmaker suggestion. I would encourage you to look into that, see if that structure exists for your institute, because it has been really helpful in many ways in both supporting, so really supporting the policy behind the institute, so funding. So the primary purpose of the alliances are to support appropriations for the institutes, but they really do serve as a good communication vehicle as well. Can you talk about a little bit about how NIH decides what they're going to support? What are the
Yeah.
priorities, and how what the interaction also is with Congress in some ways,
Yeah.
and deciding what those priorities are?
Yeah, so you mentioned that less and less frequently are we getting federal legislation that focuses on a particular disease area. I think there's, certainly things like Alzheimer's disease. We've seen different areas get that, but not so many. So for the most part, and this is probably 90% or more of NIH funding, it's a competitive process. So we have funding opportunities that people that are working on any disease area can apply to, and it goes to a peer review, reviewed by a peer of their experts that come from universities like themselves, and then that gets a numerical score, and it's normalized according to some different factors, and then we set a funding pay line. We say we can fund up to this percentile score, and how well a disease area competes has to do with the number of researchers working in that area and the quality of the applications that they put forward. That is the majority of how we do funding. And rare disease areas do compete quite well in that, because part of the review is, significance. How is this going to impact? Doesn't have to be public health wide. How is it going to impact that condition, advancing knowledge for that or helping people with that condition? So let's see. What was the rest of the question?
Just how, what, outside of the disease-specific legislation, how doesn't Congress get involved in deciding what
Okay.
NIH prioritizes?
So, and I'll always bring it back to the MD CARE Act, because that's what I know. So the MD CARE Act didn't give NIH any additional funds. It encouraged us to do some things, but we had to do it with existing funds. And so we created the Wellstone Centers of Excellence program. So oftentimes what we'll do is if we get recommendations from Congress through something called, we generally call congressional report language. I mean, it could be directly in federal legislation, but more often it's a report language. And that could have started with a process where patient advocacy groups met with people on the Hill, and so they'll contact us and say either, what are you doing in this area, or we encourage you to do more in that area. And, we can take that in consideration. We look at it and say, could we combine these into a bigger thing that we'd want to set aside some special funds for, or, I said we set a pay line and we fund up to that pay line. We do have a little bit of latitude around that pay line if there are applications that maybe represent a gap in our portfolio of grants. We take other things into consideration, like the status of that lab, if they don't have any other funding or things like that. And we can fund things just above our pay line in some cases, very few. And response to congressional report language would be a reason for that as well. So I think that so I've been kind of involved at NIH in the muscular dystrophies for about 20 years now. And when the legislation was passed, in 2001, it seemed like there was a process where advocacy groups wanted to go to Congress to tell NIH what to do. And John Porter, who was a program director at NIH at the time, and I really tried to have more direct communication with the advocacy groups so we could change that loop, or we could, I guess, we could help that loop so they could come to us and find out, well, what are we doing? And, you know, they can encourage us directly, you know, well, have you considered doing it this way? And, you know, so it's a better communication than having it be that, you know, round loop. And particularly, I would think maybe before you want to go to Congress and talk to people down there, you can check with us and say, well, what's NIH already doing in this area? And that's the kind of communication that we're really happy to have at any time.
So before we sort of wrap up with a little bit more newborn screening related conversation, I think you mentioned NIH Reporter, which does, if you use it right, produce sort of numbers, metrics on the amount of funding going into different diseases. I would love to just caution maybe the community on how you use that data, because it can be easy to be kind of tempted into looking and comparing two diseases against each other and saying, look, this, you know, our community, you know, only gets this much and this community gets 2 times as much. And sometimes you see those arguments going to the Hill or going to institute leadership and really pitting yourself against other communities. And I know that in many cases that it backfires. It's not, you can use that data to look at what's happening in your community and to then reach out to the research community and try to spur more applications to try and understand, going to the institute, you know, directors and to the program staff and help them, or help them help you understand what's behind that number and what's the context behind it. And really just wanted to encourage people to do some of that work before you fall into the trap of just comparing one to another using that site, because I think there's so much more that goes behind it and sometimes it can backfire. I didn't know if there's other arguments, other tools, other data or information that might move a program director and institute to put things up the priority list, other than Congress, other than, you know, legislation that is making you do it. What can the community bring to you to help you decide what to do?
Yeah, so you know, one of the things that we look at from a program director perspective is, you know, we go out, we go to meetings, we talk to investigators, we listen to the patient advocacy community and read the literature, and then, you know, we'd like to do something to accelerate progress and to really promote advance in that area. So we're looking for kind of scientific opportunities and other types of opportunities. So let me give an example. When I first came to NINDS in 2015, I really saw the need for advancing clinical trial readiness. And I saw it from the muscular dystrophy perspective, but I knew that other rare diseases probably needed this as well. And the way we define clinical trial readiness is having outcome measures and biomarkers that are fit for purpose, that are robust, that can be used in clinical trials to efficiently determine whether a candidate drug has a positive effect or not. Because the worst thing we see is big investment in a clinical trial, inconclusive. So we at NINDS created a program that's exclusively for rare diseases. It's got to be neurological, neuromuscular condition, and it's a clinical trial readiness grant. And we have an internal set aside that we use for that. And it funds multi-site groups of clinical researchers to enroll participants and then validate these outcome measures and biomarkers that will be used in upcoming trials. They have to, when they apply for it, they have to explain what the urgency is in that disease community. And, that sort of activity is also done in other grant areas like the Rare Disease Clinical Research Network through NCATS. And, we think that, so, I pitched that to the Institute leadership as rare diseases have a special place and need for this kind of trial readiness. Because of the limitations and the number of patients that will be available for the trials, then the outcome measures and biomarkers need to be especially good, to compensate for that limited number of participants. And also, we're investing a lot in therapy development for rare diseases, and sometimes that therapy development process outpaces the trial readiness. So we may have, situations of great candidate therapies and poor ways to test whether they're actually efficacious in humans. So in that way, we hope that this initiative in trial readiness might actually be cost-effective for us and for the community in the long run to decrease the likelihood that clinical trials are inconclusive.
So what I'm hearing is you can really think about the impact of particular research. So if you're talking about your newborn screening, agenda, what are those gaps you have to fill to be able to get to the finish line, and really make the case of why NIH has a unique role in filling this gap and what might come of all of these follow-on steps if, if this first step is solved. So think about that when you're communicating with NIH as well. I want to maybe end on just another question about communication, about how the institutes communicate with each other and how that might lend itself. So in your case, how do you share the learnings that are coming out of activities because of the MD Care Act, because of your centers of excellence? How do you share out that information? How do you talk to other institutes and sort of disseminate and make sure that, especially in rare diseases where you just talked about one issue that all rare can benefit from learning from, how do you think about communicating with other institutes?
Well, so within NIH, there's a lot of committees and communication and coordination among different institutes. We have many, many different trans NIH or multi-institute working groups. Again, for the muscular dystrophies, we have the Muscular Dystrophy Coordinating Committee that involves NINDS, my former institute, NIAMS, and Lindsay Criswell, the director of NIAMS, is currently the chair of MDCC. We also involve NICHD, and Dr. Diana Bianchi was the prior chair of MDCC, and she's the director of NICHD, and as well as NHLBI is involved. So, at the institute level, institute director level, they're having communications, and the program staff level are also communicating. And it's like that for a lot of the different rare diseases. As you mentioned, NCATS, the National Center for Advancing Translational Researches, they have an office of rare disease and really lead a lot of the efforts for things across rare diseases for NIH. And so they have every 2 weeks a meeting of program directors to talk about, what's going on with the RDCRN program or, other things, helping to organize the annual Rare Diseases Day at NIH. And then for communicating outward, outside of NIH, we do things like, our MD Care Act, our action plan for the muscular dystrophies is on our website, mdcc.nih.gov, and the priorities that are really going into this revision of the action plan, I think would be common to almost all rare diseases. It's things like clinical trial readiness, having effective model systems for understanding mechanism of disease and testing potential treatments. We have a working group on thriving with muscular dystrophies, and they're specifically talking about, access to benefits, access to care, access to resources that would cut across any area. So I think it's worthwhile looking at some of the strategic plans that NIH has participated in with other groups, and there'll be common themes that should resonate across any areas.
It's great that you mentioned strategic plan, and I'll just pitch that NCATS just released their updated strategic plan as an agency, and they're having a meeting, and I'm getting the time card, but they're having an upcoming meeting to share that plan with the community and start the engagement process. So if that's something that you all are interested in, we'll make sure I can grab the link and share out the date. I want to say it's September 30th, but don't quote me on that. So there are always great opportunities to engage with the agency on topics across the board, and there are people in every institute, especially in yours and in NCATS, but really across the board, rare disease champions, and really encourage you to think about what are the questions that will help advance your newborn screening agenda, and talk to the agency about them. So thank you so much for being here
Pleasure.
and
Thanks for
sharing with
inviting me.
us. And I think with that, do we have time for one question or no? One question? No. Okay. Perfect. Well, then we will have one last session before lunch.
And you can't see me, so I'm just going to use this. What an incredible morning we've had so far. As Dylan mentioned earlier, we've been, obviously, myself, Dylan, Natasha, and others, Annie, have been planning this for months. And when you finally see it come together, I've been blown away, and I've learned a lot. I also recognize that we planned, myself and Dylan, to give you updates right before lunch. So I get that I am the barrier between food, and I also get that it's a little chilly in here. So I promise that I will go quickly, but I'm super excited to share some updates with you today. For those that I haven't had the opportunity to meet, my name is Mariana Rea, and I am the Associate Director of Programs at Expecting Health. So I have the true, and I mean this in every sense of the word, joy and privilege to really think about and build programs that bring together groups like this, that bring together all different partners, and we've heard a lot about partnerships in the newborn screening community, and really think about how can we develop programs that shift and make changes within the system. So I'm not going to talk about everything that we do today, but I am going to highlight a few of what we think to be really impactful programs that we've been able to host and facilitate over the last few years. If I'm shivering, and it is literally because I am so cold, so I apologize in advance. I also wanted to point out, we haven't mentioned yet today, I know everybody in this room already knows this, but it is Newborn Screening Awareness Month. And one of the programs that Expecting Health runs and manages is Baby's First Test. And every September, Baby's First Test hosts a campaign. This year, our theme is Educate, Engage, and Empower. And so at the end of my presentation, I am going to show some resources that you all are welcome to use and utilize to help bring awareness this month to newborn screening. And hopefully, you are educated, engaged, and empowered. I am going to share a few of these updates through a lens that if you've heard me present before, you have heard me talk about this. This is a framework that I personally think about often and that we use in all of the programs that we develop. We don't want to just stand up here and share updates with you. We really, as a community, want to share things that we know can make a change and make a difference. And so when we think about how to best do that, this is a framework that through our programs we've really started to see come to life. It may seem obvious. It's what I use to frame presentations that I give, but it is also what I use to think about building out these programs at a sort of larger and global level. So as we heard this morning in a lot of the panels, a lot of this work starts by first recognizing that there's an issue or a problem that needs to be talked about and changed. And you can't do that without bringing awareness to that issue or problem. So I'm going to share with you a bit about the work we do through two of our ambassador programs. Once you become aware of what actually needs to be addressed and talked about, oftentimes the next step is to really think about what are the tools and resources we need to put into place to help make a change or make a difference. And so through that, or in this particular update, I'm going to share with you some very specific resources that we've recently launched to help think about specific strategies for engaging families and communities that all of you are already working with. And then last, but certainly the most important, is what can you do to get involved? What is the actual action that you can walk away with? So first, I am going to mention or share a little bit about some of our ambassador programs. And the first I'll mention is our student ambassador program. So about 3 years ago, this was a program that we launched out of a need. My background is in genetic counseling. I am a trained genetic counselor. I have worked with genetic counseling programs across the country for many years. And there is a real need within the genetic counseling community to understand public health. That is not something that genetic counseling students have extensive training on, and that's not unique to genetic counseling students only. And so oftentimes we would be having conversations or hearing from students that they want to understand more about how public health works. What are the issues within public health? And so we utilized newborn screening as a very specific way to approach that problem. And we brought together, we created an opportunity for students that are a part of genetic counseling programs across the country to apply and join us for an interactive virtual 1-month sort of in-depth program where they learn more specifically about different aspects of newborn screening. Everything from why newborn screening is important. We bring in different family and advocacy groups to share their experiences. We talk about newborn screening at the state and federal level. And you can see on this slide that through a variety of different, very specific synchronous and asynchronous learning opportunities, these students really do get an in-depth exposure and experience to understanding what the newborn screening system is, what the challenges are, and how they, in their role as a genetic counselor when they leave, can really be knowledgeable and be aware and impact patients and families that they may be working with that are going through newborn screening experiences. And to date, we've actually been able to train over 60 genetic counseling students in the 3 years that we've done this program. This was a really cool year because we actually invited several of those genetic counseling students to come back. A number of them are doing research studies in newborn screening. And so we had a webinar recently where 3 of these students shared their research, their research and the work that they've been doing. And some of it has actually, it's incredibly important and has been shared at a national level, and some have already been published as well. So I point this program out because you can see in the map, these are the states where we've had students from programs that have participated. We are definitely hoping to get students in every state across the country. I know that there are other students and professors in this room. We are always looking for opportunities to grow and expand this program. We would love to expand it beyond just genetic counseling students and also start to engage students in other specialties as well. So if that's an interest, please come and talk to me about that. I also want to highlight another ambassador program that we have, which was a family leadership program that was developed also 3 years ago. And as similar to the student ambassador program, this was a way that we could bring together different families and family representatives and leaders within the newborn screening community to, again, take a deeper dive and look more further into the newborn screening community. We have several of these family ambassadors in the room today, and I'm going to put them on the spot. If you have participated in this program and you're in this room, could you raise your hand? Awesome. Thank you, ladies. There are a number that couldn't be here today, but what I wanted to highlight about this program is that the purpose and the meaning behind this was certainly to connect families to one another, and similar to that framework that I shared, raise awareness for what are some of the challenges, what is going on in the newborn screening community, but truly to connect and bring together these individual families who came from different aspects of the newborn screening community to come together, to learn from each other, and to continue to identify opportunities and ways that these individual family leaders can deepen their involvement and engagement within the newborn screening system. Many of them had already been active, but to now identify opportunities, and I'll talk about these here, that they could jump in and do a little bit more. And we sort of think about that the individual level, the community level, and certainly at the system level. And so individually, these family leaders and ambassadors are connecting with other families. You heard Liz, and Liz is one of our ambassadors, talk about sharing her story, and all of our ambassadors are doing that in a variety of ways. But that individual step to share her story led to a much bigger opportunity and way to engage within the community and within the system. Others have taken that next step to really reach out to their state newborn screening program and to work actively within their state to develop projects, to improve newborn screening and the process in their state, to sit on advisory committees at the state level. Many have filmed and recorded their stories in a variety of different ways. We actually had some filming yesterday through the CDC. Some have authored books. Some have established their own nonprofit organizations. And certainly, in doing that, again, it just continues to create opportunities to get more involved at even a national level. And so a number of family ambassadors have shared their testimonies publicly at the ACHDNC meetings. We have a number of our ambassadors that are participating in work groups and task forces, at a national level. Some have attended conferences and even spoken at national conferences. And I think most importantly, and highlighted again this morning, is really how those opportunities have evolved into true partnerships with different federal agencies and national organizations. And so it's an incredible way to get engaged, and just want everybody in this room to know these ambassadors are more than willing and available to connect with you, to talk with you about the steps that they've taken to get to where they are and the incredible work that this program is doing. We still meet quarterly as a group, as a network, and have a lot of fun doing that. So next I'm going to share a little bit more again about this framework of engagement. And I won't spend too much time here, but again, just a way to sort of think about each of you as working within your own communities, but also working with the partners and others across the newborn screening system. And I think not that this is an end-all be-all way, but it certainly is a way to think about and approach how you're building and evolving the work that you do. And so some of the specific things that we've done to raise awareness about newborn screening generally and at the national level, certainly social media campaigns and awareness campaigns. I mentioned Baby's First Test Newborn Screening Awareness Month. These are all great examples of how we've really tried to put in the community information, meaningful, relevant information about newborn screening. And one of the things that we've done a lot with through our Navigate Newborn Screening program is communities of practice. And so creating spaces just like this on a regular basis where different partners from within the newborn screening community can come together and share what are your challenges, share what is it that you're struggling with within your community, and then learning from others that may have overcome that same barrier at a different time. We've certainly spent a lot of time creating tools and resources to build knowledge about, again, all different aspects of newborn screening. So if you go to the Expecting Health website or to Baby's First Test, you will find a very large repository of resources that are all publicly available, everything from educational videos, online learning modules. We've done a lot of work to try to create tools that support education during pregnancy. Whole nother talk that I could give, but an important area on really bringing awareness to newborn screening before newborn screening happens. And so there are a lot of tools around the prenatal education area that you can access and utilize there. Toolkits, implementation guides, lots and lots of different things. And then as I've already mentioned, kind of what are the things that people then do with that resource, and what is the action they've taken? We've talked about many of our ambassadors and others that we work with, participate in a variety of national level organizations and opportunities, and through that really do bring influence and shifting in the way that some of the decisions around newborn screening have been made. I want to call your attention to two very specific resources that really were just released over the last 3 months or so, but have been several years in the works. And this was through the National Genetics Education and Family Support Center, which for anyone that isn't familiar, we refer to that fondly as the Family Center because that's less of a mouthful. And this was a 5-year grant-funded, or HRSA-funded rather, program that just concluded this last May. And through that, again, a number of different resources that are really utilized, or really focused rather, on supporting families who are going through a genetics journey. So while this isn't specific to newborn screening, many of the tools and resources that are available through the Family Center focus on supporting families through their genetics journey. And so there were several different work groups that came together to create, I'll start on the right-hand side, a guide or some tips, a fact sheet and tips around inclusion, and specifically thinking about ways to be more inclusive to all families as they navigate their genetics journey. There's also a guide to genetic counseling. We know for many families who may be newer to the rare disease space, that can be a new and sometimes overwhelming process. And so both of these are available for you all to use and to share within your communities as well. You can also go to the website, and I have it small here in the bottom left-hand corner, but on the website you'll find additional information, our Family Leadership Hub, which has a number of trainings, so depending on where you are in your journey, you may find some of that information useful and helpful, and certainly would be happy to connect you with other families if you're interested as well through our Family Leadership Hub. And then lastly, I'm just going to provide to you a quick update. Many in this room are already familiar with this, but for those that may not, the Health Resources and Services Administration has supported newborn screening through funding in a variety of different ways for many, many years. And recently, there has been a pretty large shift in funding towards states. And so I bring this up for this room today. This map is showing you the blue states are states that have received funding over the last year, specifically to support newborn screening activities through what is known as the Propel or Co-Propel grants. And in that, there's been roughly over $15 million that has been distributed to these, I think, 35-ish states. And part of the task of that funding that these states have been asked to take on is family engagement. And while that's super exciting that each of these states are now thinking about that and implementing that in different ways into the work that they're doing through these grants, it also presents an opportunity for you all in this room, and wanted to encourage each of you, especially if you see that your state has received this funding, to really think about reaching out to your state programs, because they are having conversations now about engaging and educating families, and what does that look like? And so it's an incredible opportunity for this room to really be a part of that conversation and to help shape what that looks like. So if you aren't already connected to your state programs, that is something that Expecting Health and others in this room can help you do. So please do not hesitate to come up and chat with me afterwards. We've done a lot of work individually with states as well on this, and have lots of ideas in the work, but would love more thought and more partnership on that as well. And lastly, as I mentioned, we are in the midst, it's mid-September, of celebrating Newborn Screening Awareness Month. Every single one of us can do something to bring more awareness to newborn screening, and so please feel free to visit our website at the bottom there for more resources and tools that you can utilize. A lot of things are available for social media. We have a variety of different graphics and text that you can use, but also understand that not everybody utilizes social media, so that is not the only thing that's in the toolkit we've created. So please take a minute to go visit that. And if you have any questions about anything that you see there or anything that I've shared today, please take a minute to pull me aside sometime this afternoon. I would love to meet and chat with you more. So with that, I will turn it over to Dylan. And take it from me.
We're actually going to change schedule a little bit. We're going to go back here. It's a good place to stay. But since a couple of sessions went a little long today, rather than have us be late for lunch, we're going to break for lunch early and push our update for afterwards. So lunch is ready. It was where breakfast was earlier this morning, so just out in the hall. Lunch will be for an hour. I'll give a 5-minute call later, but 12:55, we'll be back from lunch. So thank you all for a fantastic morning. I'm really excited for the afternoon session, and lunch is served. Thank you, guys.